folks, and we're back to the Weekly Rot. We got a special guest today, a fella that I've been following for years now, independent journalist and content creator, James Lee, coming out of San Diego. How are you today, James?
I'm good. How's it going, John? Thanks for having me.
Hey, man, it's a pleasure. We are doing this little experiment called Independent News, and me and you have been on this journey for quite some time. I wanted to give the people watching just a chance to kind of get to know you. How'd you get started in all this kind of craziness in this world we find ourselves in?
How did I get started? Well, I'm going to give you the shorter version of this, which is basically I had an awakening through, I'm sure a lot of people had awakenings in COVID. I was working as a consultant, a management consultant for Big Pharma. I saw some of the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. I did not like it.
Wow.
And then so I just started putting videos on the internet, and here we are. It's now been 4.5, 5 years, almost 5 years to the day that I posted my first video on YouTube.
Can I ask you something? Do you find that time, because that's wild to me, you're making me kind of rewind. It's probably been about 4 years for me now. Is time moving differently since COVID? Do you find that shit is just, or do you feel like time got stolen from us? Like, I feel like I look back and all of a sudden I'm 37 years old, James. Like, how did this happen? What is happening with our conception
That's a great question. I don't know if time slowed down or stopped, but I certainly view my life as a before COVID, BC, or AC after COVID. I certainly have that in my brain of like, oh, look at I remember the good old days before COVID, before all the shit, knew everything was going on that was jacked up. And then now here we are, and it seems like everything, I have to question almost everything. I'm like, is the news covering this? Is this true? Or is there an ulterior motive for them to cover this story and amplify this story? All kinds of things pop in my head.
And isn't that a beautiful thing? Because I do sometimes, I like to pontificate over a beverage at the end of our day, reporting the random news that we find. So I come back to this, like, you talk about the awakening you had during COVID. And I'm happy to say, I think that whatever they tried to do with that, I'm not saying there wasn't a pandemic. There very clearly was. I noticed even my own cough has changed. So, having said that, it became an exercise of an experiment of control, in my opinion. And I think it backfired. It ignited people like you, James, into starting to ask the right questions. How important is it today to have independent sources for news, do you think?
Well, it's as important as it ever was. I think we just have more access to it now, and we're seeing a huge information warfare where this war didn't take place before because they had control of the entire territory. When I mean the mainstream did. Now you have new guys popping up, yourself, me, a lot of other different guys starting to give their, I guess you can call it their version of the events, right? Because we're all kind of looking at the same things, but I might view it from a different lens. I might bring in different sources, and that changes the perception of what's going on. And now it's as hard, but I would say it's as hard as ever to stay independent, because I think you probably feel it, right? You have a really sizable audience, beyond 1 million, and people like that, I see them being kind of picked off one by one to say, well, come join us. We'll give you a nice cushy life. You can say pretty much everything you still want to say, but there's a couple of issues, when we tap your shoulder, you're going to fall in line for those couple things. But other than that, you're super independent.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. I actually, I had a fellow creator, I'm not going to say his name, Alex Kellerman, but he told me that his manager actually advised him not to ever collab with me. So, it's like you got to take these steps to grow the channel and grow the audience, but at the same time, you start getting these, restrictions placed on you. Now, you've been doing a lot of work, James, on food and the additives, if you want to call them that. I call them chemicals that they've been putting in our food. And this is kind of a two-pronged question I got for you. So, when we talk about doing our own research, I find it hilarious that now that's been vilified, right? oh, don't doing your own research is dangerous. They're basically saying don't read. So we've come full circle. So I want you to comment on that, and then just maybe give an overview of some of the developments over the last week with RFK Jr. and with some of the bans that they just announced, I think, yesterday.
So I think there's a lot of positives and negatives that have come out in the last week. I'll start with a positive really quick because I think that's a big win. It shows that if we get enough eyeballs on something, things happen, which is the banning of artificial and synthetic food dyes, the red 40s,
Yes.
blue 5, yellow 6, whatever these things are, getting them out of the food supply because they've shown to be, massive. This is where I would back off and say, okay, I'm not a scientist. This is where okay, you don't know what you're talking about with these synthetic food dyes. They're safe. Well, I say, well, they're safe, but a lot of people are getting sick. They're getting, hormone disruption. There's people getting ADHD, all kinds of stuff that are tied to these things.
Yeah.
And so this is definitely a good thing. And we have a bunch of other countries that don't have this. So this is a good development. Now, on the flip side, there are some worrying things that I've looked into recently, one of them being glyphosate, which is the key ingredient in the weed killer Roundup.
Yes.
That's a huge one because that's, at least in the United States, that's being sprayed on 60% of the crops that we grow.
Correct.
Specifically a lot, heavily in corn and wheat and soy. So a lot of the staple foods that we eat are treated with glyphosate. And this is where, once again, I was watching an interview. You'll find this funny, actually. The head of PR at Bayer, who makes glyphosate, they're the top manufacturer, they're definitely paying attention and listening to us. Because one, they said it's 100% safe. There's no ties to cancer, no ties to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, all this stuff that people are bringing up.
Heard that one before.
And they also they threw in there this little bit here, and this ties back to people's distrust of NGOs and such. They said the WHO says it's causing cancer, but do you trust the WHO? Who is the WHO? They're not a regulatory body.
You gotta be fucking kidding me. Oh my God.
Yeah, so I think because people, rightly so, are distrustful of organizations like the WHO. We've learned through COVID, right? There are certain agendas that they are prioritizing that might be not so good for the entire health of the world, but I'm sure they're doing some good things too, right? And this is one of those situations they're saying, hey, there's some links to cancer here that they've called out, but now it's being weaponized against the people because they've listened and said, oh, okay, it looks like people don't like the WHO. Now let's cite them and say, well, look at these guys.
It's like the snake eating its own tail. You know what I mean? Like it's actually kind of hilariously disturbing, if I may say. Now, I just want to quickly say glyphosate. I was out in New Brunswick, Canada for 6 months this year. I learned a lot about glyphosate out there because the major oil company that pretty much employs everyone in that province, called Irving, sprays glyphosate all over the forests. When did it become standard practice to put petroleum products on fucking food? Like, when did this happen? Why is this happening, do you think?
Well, that happened. There's actually, we don't have to speculate on that there's very detailed progression of what happened here. So glyphosate was introduced back in 1974 by Monsanto, which was acquired by Bayer in 2018. But they introduced it in 1974 to kill weeds. It was marketed as a miracle weed killer. And I would say the application or the adoption of that wasn't dramatic up until the 90s, which is when Monsanto introduced what they call the Roundup Ready crops. So Roundup is the weed killer product. So Roundup Ready crops, which are genetically bioengineered to resist glyphosate. And that's when the use of glyphosate exploded. And then that's when we started seeing a lot of ill health effects coming from it. And once again, I will point out that according to the manufacturer Bayer, it is 100% safe. There are no ties to cancer, except I'm going to also point out that there have been 180,000 lawsuits filed against Bayer, specifically about the links to cancer. And Bayer has had to pay out over $12 billion in damages to people that have gotten sick from Roundup glyphosate, but it's 100% safe, as they say. It's so safe, once again, that more recently they have been putting cases through the Supreme Court. They have been lobbying Congress at the federal level as well as the state level to make it illegal to sue Bayer, linking glyphosate to cancer. So it's so safe that you're not allowed to sue, and those are exactly the actions that that an honest actor
Absolutely.
would take. That's the sign of a confidence in a product. I would have to say is that you can't sue us.
And don't you dare try and boycott Israel.
And that's where I say, hey, I'm not a scientist.
I said, don't you dare try and boycott Israel. Reminds me of that as well. Sorry to cut you off, James. I'll let you finish.
No. All I was gonna wrap up with is, I'm not a scientist, but I can see the links here. You don't have to be a scientist to say, well, if the product is so safe, why are you getting sued? Not only getting sued, but you're losing the lawsuit.
You don't. You also don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that when governments create legislation to protect a company from a certain liability, it means that they're probably guilty. Allegedly.
Well, the government, actually, they wrote a letter. There was a recent letter, which I covered in my video, that was sent from a bunch of senators. And they said that we need to deregulate. We actually have overregulation of glyphosate, and that it's leading to potential food insecurities. They said glyphosate is necessary to produce the amount of food that we need to serve a society. And so if the activists get involved and say that we should remove glyphosate from the supply chain of food, then that could lead to food insecurities for the underserved population, for minorities, all this stuff. It's like, you don't want to be a racist now.
Yeah, right. If you don't support glyphosate, you're racist, you're homophobic. Well, listen, at the end of the day, James, I know the government's utmost concern is ensuring that the people have access to affordable food, which we can see, very reflected in the modern day grocery prices. I paid $20 for a thing of ice cream and a pack of Tic Tacs about 20 minutes ago. So I think things are going real good in that regard. Moving on to one last topic, James, to have here with you tonight. So we have next week a very large guest coming on. Her name is Jasmine Mooney. She is the Canadian who was detained by ICE for 17 days. So I just was curious, what's the buzz down there in San Diego and America in general? Are people still supporting ICE's mandate? And what do you think about the fact that they're able to, apprehend people without explaining to them why?
Yeah, so that's a tricky topic, and I've actually been doing some digging on this, because one thing about the media that you have to understand is that it's entirely partisan. So everybody is doing partisan news, meaning that they're picking stories and they're highlighting stories that are good for one person and bad for the other. In this case, right, we have a lot of what you would call the mainstream media that's more liberal leaning, and they want to run stories that make Trump look really bad. And so they're highlighting all of these, I think, horrific cases of even U.S. citizens being detained by ICE and not given due process. And I'm trying to, and then so I did some research looking back if this was happening before, and apparently it has been happening all throughout, the last couple decades, even when Obama was in office before then, that there were mistakes that were happening with ICE, and they were grabbing people off the streets that were not, supposed to, that didn't commit any crime. They're not a gang member. They're not illegals, but that wasn't really covered in the news. But now that it's being covered, it is alarming. I mean, I would have to say my personal belief is that we need due process. I think anybody that argues against due process is not for democracy. We need to say, hey, if I grab you off the street, you need to have your day in court. We need to be able to prove the crime against you. It can't be like, oh, you're wearing a Chicago Bulls hat. Even though that guy, probably not necessarily a good dude, and I'm talking about Kilmar Garcia Abrego, he had files, he apparently beat his wife, allegedly, right? Allegedly, his wife filed a restraining order, this kind of thing. So I'm sure he's not the best of dudes, but you can't just say, well, this guy is wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and now he's MS-13 and he needs to go. There needs to be an actual documentation of, okay, this is a gang member, and he's committed X crime, and now we're going to deport this guy. That's my feeling. I think that's when you start to see it being politicized. And I would say that for the people who are more on the MAGA side, who are supporting this, saying, hey, this is not a good deal. We need to get rid of these people. It wasn't that long ago when people who weren't wearing masks were saying, hey, you are a terrorist to society. We need to remove you guys from society. So I would say, hey, if the regime changes really quick, which it does, from time to time, you don't want these same policies weaponized against you to say, oh, you didn't take a vaccine, you didn't wear a mask, and now we're gonna deport you.
Nail on the head. Yeah,
that's my
no, you nailed it, James. And like, I would just kind of just say, like, at the end of the day, that's really interesting. You blew my mind a little bit there. I bet if you do go back, the stats are the same, but now they're just shining that light on it, right? And it really creates an echo chambers. You just sent me down a rabbit hole. I'm going to be doing my own research on that later today, because like I said, we have a very
look up the numbers. I mean, there are cases under Obama, and then same with the. I would just throw in. This is kind of a different topic, but an RFK Jr. thing. I don't know if you've seen that people are getting up in arms because he's doing the autism study, and they're saying, okay, that's they're creating some kind of data breach, and it's invasion of privacy. But Obama had a similar thing going on where he collected a bunch of people's data for a study as well. So those things aren't necessarily novel, but they're novel in the way they're being covered right now to say, oh, this is an overreach. And it kind of fits it. It's a narrative. We live in kind of a narrative-driven society where now the narrative is like, oh, we're being authoritarian, we're doing this and that. And all of that may be true, but I would argue that we've been authoritarian for quite some time now. It's just that we didn't view it as such, or the news didn't cover it in a way because their guy was in office, so they didn't want their guy to look like they were authoritarian, right? If you watch Fox News, right, Obama was a big authoritarian, but if you watch, NBC or ABC, New York Times, Obama was this very liberal human rights figure. And I think some of that is happening right now, and I try to stay nonpartisan above that bullshit, because I think none of these people really represent us, and say, hey, I just ask people, it's like, do you want these same policies to be weaponized against you? If there's something that the other side doesn't like you for, whether it be the vaccines, the masks, whatever else that might come in the future, do you want to be grabbed off the street and say, all right, you're going to El Salvador because we don't like you?
Which flavor of authoritarianism would you prefer, right, folks? It's like we got the blue flavor and the red flavor over here. Listen, James, at the end of the day, I think you are a level-headed ally in this continued movement. Thank you for the work you do. I just want to add one quick thing on the ICE stuff. Go figure, a 3-letter agency given tremendous reach and mandate is maybe overstepping a bit. Gee, that's never happened before in the history of countries, or specifically America, has it? It's funny, the same people that are calling for the disbandment of the FBI support to the death ICE, and I just find that democracy at its finest. I would just add also, I don't know if you've been seeing the El Salvador prison satellite photos, but they're digging massive pits beside the prison, and there was maybe a pile of unalived humans. It's undetermined at this point. They did remove the entire facility from Google Maps for a couple days. So probably not a great thing to get into, to start sending Americans to that El Salvador maximum prison. But hey, I'm just a dumb Canadian up here holding it down in winter Mexico, snow Mexico. I should add, James, there will be a tariff on this conversation. I'll send you the bill after we end today. Where can the people find you? Where are you popping? You got any projects you want to pump right now, my friend, before we let you go?
Yeah, well, I think people can follow me everywhere depending on whether they like horizontal videos or vertical videos, but I'm certainly going to be devoting a lot more effort into YouTube, which is I'm going to have both videos that are horizontal and vertical, depending on which format you like, a little bit longer things, a little bit shorter segments that I make. So it's all going to be on YouTube at 515149 James Lee spelled L-I. But that's the same handle for all of my platforms, so you can go check out Instagram, TikTok, as well as X. I'm basically everywhere. Appreciate the support.
Hey man, keep up the good fight, and we'll talk soon. And guys, watch out for the glyphosate and watch out for ICE. Take care, James.